In the heart of present-day Israel, 5 miles north of the Dead Sea and over 600 feet below sea level, lies a lifeless mound, once the lively Canaanite fortress of Jericho, the world's oldest continually inhabited city. Today, the historic mound that the modern city is now built around is called Tel Es Sultan. The fall of Jericho is a well-known account by all. It is a crucial place for our next study, as it is clearly stated that God instructed the people of Israel to take this to be their first city in their conquest for a homeland. The book of Joshua tells us that God promises that his people would be successful in taking the city and the remaining of the promised land. But today, it is a major subject of debate. Secular archaeologists maintain that the archaeological record fails to substantiate the story. What we are about to present here will blow this case wide open and reveal startling evidence that the biblical account of the fall of Jericho as it was recorded. In Joshua 3:14, we see another water crossing miracle that we don't normally hear about. When looking at the Jordan River just east of Jericho today, there isn't much of a significant size to look at. However, at the time of the crossing, it implies that the waters that come from the upstream is a sizable river. At around 1400 BC, the water of this Jordan regularly rose over its banks. An aerial view of the Jordan Valley here reveals there is a green band stretching as wide as 2 miles in some places. This would have made it approximately 120 feet deep. It would be significant crossing to make, albeit not as significant as the Red Sea crossing, but still would require God's hand. So what archaeological evidence do we see matching the conquest account of the city of Jericho? The city was first excavated by a German team, Ernst Sellen and Karl Watzinger, between 1907 and 1911. They concluded that all the evidence they found supported the biblical account. Between 1930 to 1936, the city was excavated again by British archaeologists John Garstang. In addition to the previous discoveries, he documented that the remains of the upper surrounding wall, as described in the Bible, could be dated to roughly 1400 BC. He found that in many of the remains of houses in that layer were partly full jars of burnt barley and other pottery. These also dated to the same time period. The next excavations took place between 1952 to 1958 by another British archaeologist, Kathleen Kenyon. She was able to utilize more modern techniques and technology in her dig. By cutting directly down from the center of the tell, she was able to confirm the previous findings. But what do they mean by a tell? A tell is another name for a mound. As ancient cities were built, then destroyed, then built on top of the ruins, then destroyed again, the site grows in height. What we end up with is an extremely large mound that they call a tell. The more ancient were at the bottom, while the most recent were at the top. Arguments that arise concerning the dates assigned to these various layers are at the very heart of differing views on Jericho's history. The latest work has been done by an Italian team from 1997 to 2000 and from 2009 to 2015, headed by Lorenzo Nigro. This team has solely been responsible for repudiating these earlier findings and creating all of the discrediting of the biblical account in all the academic journals on Tel El Sultan. All the discrepancies can be pointed to one main conclusion. Kenyon dated the destruction level of Jericho 150 years earlier than the arrival of the Israelites at around 1550 BC solely by, get this, the absence of pottery, findings that was common in other cities of that time. That's it. It should be noted that Kenyon had only excavated only a fraction of the city in her time spent here. So much more could be found, but wasn't. Therefore, this dating did not use the Canaanite pottery that was found, but rather on pottery that wasn't. Archaeologist and expert of Canaanite pottery, Dr. Bryant Wood, has thoroughly analyzed the pottery found by Garstang and Kenyon and concluded that this pottery's engineering and design signatures point to the period of 1400 BC, the exact time of the Israelite conquest. It has increasingly become clear that Kenyon's affiliation with Muslim-controlled Jordan, which controlled Jericho at the time of her excavations, had some political basis to this overturning of academic acceptance. Today, Jericho belongs to the West Bank in Palestine, who don't wish to concede any rights to Israel for obvious reasons. And it is for these reasons that the Italian team needs to cover up the correct findings in order to continue being granted the right to work under Palestinian Authority. This is also the reason that the team under Nigro chose to completely cover up the rooms with the jars to bury the evidence after another team was found analyzing it. Early excavators who did not hold such biased views found that Jericho was protected by a brilliant defense mechanism. At its base is a stone retaining wall more than 15 feet high, with a mud brick extension wall rising higher still. Beyond this wall was the rampart, a steep slope covered with a slick surface of white plaster, where attackers would have been exposed to arrows and slingstones from above. At the top of this rampart was the main city wall, also made with mud brick, this one more than 20 feet high and 10 feet thick. The siege suggests that it occurred in the spring and that it was a short siege. The jars found in most of the houses were full of grain, suggesting a recent harvest when very little had been eaten, and the spring is the time when harvest is gathered in the Jordan Valley. Also, as the Israelites arrived at the Jordan, they celebrated the Passover, which happens during the spring. And had the siege gone on for months, the food stock would have been eaten up. Seeing full jars suggest a very short siege, which is what we read in the account. Another interesting detail occurs around the story of Rahab, who was a resident of Jericho. In chapter 2, verse 1, Joshua sent 2 men to spy out the walled city. There, they end up meeting a harlot named Rahab, who reports to them that all the people of the land had heard what God had done for the Israelites, and they were terrified. After learning that the king of Jericho was searching for these men, Rahab hid the spies at her home for a time, then aided their escape to the mountains by night. She throws down a rope from her window to let them down. The key here is found in Joshua 2:15 that states, "For her house was on the city wall, she dwelt on the wall." In the archaeological record, all the houses that were built on the outside wall were utterly destroyed due to the collapse of the inside wall falling onto them. However, the text states that the Israelites went to Rahab's home to collect her and her family, as promised, that they would be spared and allowed to live with the Israelites. That means that the record should reveal that one small stretch of the wall could not have been destroyed to save that family. We need to look at what the original findings reveal. German excavator Ernst Sellen was the first to conduct a major excavation of this site. By looking at his records today, they are incredibly comprehensive and indeed impressive. They now seem to be forgotten. Here we see detailed etchings and photographs, including one part of the site that echoes the Rahab story in an unexpected way. Sellen had found that in this very short stretch of the wall on the north side of the city, that there were houses built on the rampart between the inner and outer walls, and there were some houses built right up against the outer wall. Ernst recorded that this small area did not fall. This can explain how the spies were able to save Rahab and her family. It remained intact, and we now have the archaeological record from Sellen's official records to back that up. Joshua 6:26-27. Cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the country. To this day, the ancient city and the entire tell has never been rebuilt. One can only imagine the dread the people of Jericho felt during the siege. Day after day, Israelites were marching around the city with the Ark of the Covenant draped in cloth and the frightening sound of the ram's horns. On the seventh day they encircled the city 7 times, and the priests give their long blasts of their horns. The people let loose a mighty shout. The walls begin to quake with a rumble they'd never heard before. Then the walls come crashing down with a force that can only be done supernaturally. This made way for the Israelites to make their way into the city and begin the quest to take Jericho. These mud brick walls collapsed, and as they did, they fell down to the base of the stone retaining wall. Kenyon describes it with great detail in her excavation report. Then we're told in chapter 6, verse 24, that the city was burned in a great fire. Kenyon states that it is very clear at this level of destruction that a fire had burned the city after the walls had fallen. Join me next time as we continue with the conquest, where God leads the Israelites to take more of Canaan, and the climactic defeat at the city of Hazor. Here on Evidence Uncovered.